The house in the forest. There is a house deep in the woods. Its windows are boarded shut. Not out of fear, but intention. Thick wooden planks nailed in crisscross patterns like scars over old eyes that have seen too much of the world. The door, heavy and dark, is closed, not locked, but chosen. Inside, the air does not move. It hums, with memory, not movement. Dust hangs like ancient fog, suspended in golden shafts of late afternoon light. A fire burns low in the hearth, not for warmth, not for show, but to remind the house it is still alive. The house is not abandoned. It is occupied by something the world no longer understands. Solitude. Outside, there is noise. Notifications, conversations, expectations. Hands constantly reaching, mouths constantly asking, "Where are you? Why haven't you answered? Are you okay? Open up." They knock, not on the door, but on your mind. They call your silence a problem. They name your absence a flaw. They diagnose your distance. But what if they are wrong? What if silence is not retreat, but resistance? What if your emotional unavailability is a rebellion we are told to be open? It's always open-hearted, open-minded, open for business, accessible, relatable, vulnerable. Present, we are taught that connection is sacred, and it is. But not all connection is communion. Some is consumption. And when you are always available, you are always being accessed, but rarely seen. You become the emotional infrastructure of others' lives. The one who replies at 2 a.m. The one who absorbs without receiving. Is the one who bleeds understanding, but receives no transfusion of care. This is not connection. This is depletion. The boarded house in the forest does not mourn the world. It remembers the cost of being seen too much, the danger of being too open for too long. It knows the price of leaking the self, drop by drop, into every person who knocks on the door, asking for warmth, but never bringing wood for the fire. Carl Jung called it the inflation of the persona, the mask we wear to survive in society. A mask that smiles when we ache, agrees when we tremble, responds when we long to disappear. But the house knows masks must be removed somewhere, even if only in the dark alone. There is no music here, only the crackle of the fire, the groan of old beams stretching like bones in the cold, the creak of silence becoming sacred. This silence is not empty. It is full of echoes, of thoughts you haven't had time to think, of dreams you forgot to remember, of griefs you postponed to keep others comfortable. Friedrich Nietzsche once warned us, "He who cannot find solitude is a slave." In the herd, he said, we lose the ability to say no. We forget our own voice in the chorus of approval. To be unavailable, to say no to the endless summons of society, is not selfishness, it is individuation. Return to what is essential, unpolluted, unperformed. You sit alone in the house now, no mirror, no screen, no audience, just the low fire, the hum of the void, and the presence of yourself. Undistracted, unfiltered. Alan Watts once said, "To know yourself, you must stop imagining yourself." But how can you stop imagining yourself if every moment you are being imagined by others? The house, the act of emotional unavailability, is a clearing. A place where the projections dissolve, where the ego unravels, where the imagined self is allowed to die. So the authentic self can begin to whisper. Outside they say you've changed. They call it coldness. Distance. They accuse you of avoidance, but you know the truth. This is not avoidance. It is alignment. It's not cruelty, but clarity. You have not left the world. You've simply stopped leaking into it. You are no longer a screen for others to project their needs onto. You are a wall. Not to keep others out, but to keep your soul intact. Kierkegaard wrote, "The greatest hazard of all, to be oneself." But you cannot be yourself when you are always performing. You cannot think deeply when you are always available. So you sit, in silence, in solitude, in stillness. Let the fire burn down, not out, but inward. This house in the woods is not a prison. It is a temple. It is where the soul returns after being scattered across too many conversations, too many eyes, too many expectations. Being emotionally unavailable does not mean you feel less. It means you no longer offer your emotions to those who do not handle them with reverence. It is not detachment from people. It is detachment from performance, from noise. From the burden of being endlessly known, you are not disappearing, you are reappearing. In your own presence, Outside, the voices keep calling, but they are softer now. It's like wind brushing against a mountain that will not move. The house does not open, but the fire glows a little brighter, and somewhere deep within, you exhale. Not with exhaustion, but with relief. Because you have remembered something sacred, that not all doors are meant to be opened. That silence is not a lack, but a source. That being unavailable is how you finally become whole. The open cage, they say, it's a virtue, to be emotionally accessible, to keep the gates open, to welcome every question, every cry, every call for help. They call it empathy, progress, vulnerability. But sometimes, virtue is the name we give to prisons we've decorated with flowers. The world claps when you share. It smiles when you explain yourself. It leans in when you pour yourself out. But what they call openness can quickly become obligation, an invisible contract. Be available or be forgotten. Be transparent or be suspicious. Be expressive or be accused of hiding something. You become a house with no doors, no locks, no shadows. Every emotion, up for consumption. Every silence, up for interpretation. Carl Jung warned us. He spoke of the persona, the face we wear to move through society. The approved mask that smiles just right, listens just enough, and performs empathy even when the well has run dry. But over time, the mask fuses to the skin. You forget who you are without it. The tragedy is not in wearing the mask. It's in forgetting you ever had a face beneath it. You become applause-shaped, your soul rearranged for engagement. You answer before you're asked. You reveal before you're ready. You offer warmth, even as your own fire dims to ash. And what do they call it? Strength, empathy, love? But in truth, you are bleeding invisibly. Each conversation another incision, each interaction another subtraction. The open cage is the cruelest kind because it looks like freedom, because they tell you it is. But it is built from the bones of praise. Each compliment another bar. Each "you're so strong" another lock. They love the version of you that never says no. They cherish the you that's always there, always responding, always soft, always emotionally fluent. But who is loving you when you're no longer performing? Friedrich Nietzsche called it the herd instinct, the subtle tyranny of belonging. We are conditioned to feel shame when we step outside the group, when we become unavailable, silent, disengaged. So we play the role, we stay in the cage, wings folded politely, because silence feels like selfishness, distance feels like betrayal, alone feels like wrong. But what if the opposite were true? To always be available is to always be vulnerable. Not in the brave way, but in the draining way. Your time, no longer your own. Your silence, suspicious. Your stillness, misunderstood. You become a public theater. Your joy curated. Your grief explained. Every moment exists for another's comfort. Your solitude becomes a sin. Schopenhauer saw it clearly. He wrote that the wise person does not fear solitude. They prefer it. Because only in solitude does one escape the shallow obligations of social theater. Only in solitude do your thoughts return to their original language, not distorted by the hunger to be heard, but pure, quiet, whole. Silence is no longer awkward. It becomes sacred. There is a strange freedom in not answering, subtle rebellion in not explaining. Detachment becomes revolutionary. You are no longer a product on emotional shelves. You are no longer the comfort system for people who never asked if you were comfortable. You're simply absent. And in that absence, something ancient returns. Yourself. Your soul. Your will. Kierkegaard called it inwardness. The quiet center from which authentic life emerges. But inwardness demands detachment. It asks you to stop performing, to sit in the paradox of being misunderstood, to not defend your silence, to not explain your distance, to not apologize for needing to disappear. And Alan Watts, he once said, "Muddy water is best cleared by leaving it alone." So what if the water is you? What if your presence is muddy because you've been stirred too often? What if you've never truly been alone long enough to see yourself clearly? This is not a rejection of connection. It is a return to depth. This is not apathy. It is authority. It's not absence, but the space where something real can finally emerge. When the mask finally cracks, when the cage swings open, when the world stops clapping, who do you become? Who are you without a reflection? We learn to look for ourselves in others. Their eyes become our mirrors, their approval our affirmation, their judgment our compass. We smile when they smile, we shrink when they disapprove. We speak only in languages we know they'll understand. Over time, we stop asking, "Who am I?" and begin asking, "Who do they think I am?" This is the room of mirrors. It's not made of glass, but of perception. Every face we meet becomes another surface to reflect against. Every opinion, a contour we adjust ourselves around. The danger is not the mirror. The danger is the forgetting that you are not the reflection, but the one casting it. Carl Jung called it the inflation of the persona. When the mask becomes so seamless, we forget we're wearing one at all. You become fragmented. A collage stitched together from everyone else's gaze. You become someone else, and the real you begins to fade. You're so kind. You're too cold. Why don't you open up? You're too intense. Just be normal. Be more real. Be less much. Be more, be more, be more. Until you are nothing. Nietzsche warned us, he who fights with monsters should be careful, lest he become a monster. But in the mirror room, the monsters are not beasts. They're the expectations you try to live up to, the roles you play to be loved, scripts you inherit to be safe. And the longer you stare into the mirror, the longer you stare into the others, the more your image disappears. You become reactive, not real, reflection that dances for the gaze, and then it happens. You find a mirror that doesn't respond. It doesn't praise. It doesn't shame. It offers no identity. Only silence. Only absence. Only freedom. What happens when you stop reflecting? When you stop performing? When you close the door to mirrors and walk into the unknown at first? Terror, because you've never seen your face without someone else's eyes to approve of it. You've never spoken without listening for applause. You've never lived without adjusting. Kierkegaard spoke of this silence, called it the leap of faith, a paradoxical surrender, not surrender to others, but surrender of the need for them to define you. To leap into a life without guarantees, to say, I don't know who I am yet, but I will find out without your mirrors. This is not apathy. This is awakening. To be emotionally unavailable is not to reject love. It is to protect it. Stop prostituting your soul for scraps of attention. It is to return to stillness, to the forest of yourself, to the wilderness that cannot be named. Schopenhauer once wrote, "A man can be himself only so long as he is alone. In solitude, the masks rot and fall away. The roles decay, and beneath them, you meet the only person who matters, the one who has watched silently from the beginning. You, Alan, as once said, trying to define yourself is like trying to bite your own teeth, so you stop defining, you stop chasing, you start being. The mirrors don't break all at once. They crack slowly, like an old illusion unraveling. And in that unraveling, you regain something sacred, not superiority, not perfection, but authorship. You stop living as a reaction, begin living as a response to truth. This is what it means to reclaim your life. To stop playing roles in mirrors, to stop bending for visibility, to walk away from every version of you that was born for applause but died in silence, because you are not who they see. You are who remains when all mirrors shatter, confronting the shadow in solitude. We imagine detachment as peaceful, a quiet cabin, a closed door, a clean break from the noise of the world. But detachment, real detachment, is not peace, not at first. It is a descent, a confrontation, a reckoning. Because the moment you stop distracting yourself, everything you've buried begins to rise. Carl Jung called it the shadow, the unlit part of the psyche, the self you don't show, the pain you pretend isn't there, the parts you abandon because they didn't fit the image. When you are emotionally available to the world, you are often unavailable to yourself, because the performance takes energy. You smile, not because you're happy, but because it's expected. You listen, not because you're whole, but because you're afraid of what will surface if you don't. But when the audience leaves, when the mask falls, when the phone stays unanswered, the shadow steps forward. Solitude is not empty, it is full. Too full. With old fears, unmet desires, unfinished grief. They wait in the silence, where performance used to live. They ask no permission. They come with no warning. They don't knock. They return. And you will feel tempted to go back, to reconnect, to be seen, to be needed, because solitude hurts. Schopenhauer wrote that life is a pendulum between suffering and boredom, and it is only when the noise fades that this truth becomes deafening. In the quiet, you feel the boredom like weight, not the absence of stimulation, but the presence of everything you've postponed, the ache, the shame, the ungrieved wounds. They rise like smoke, filling the empty temple of your solitude. You are not broken. You are simply meeting the part of you that has waited a lifetime to be seen. This is not regression. It is integration. To become whole is not to become clean. It is to bring light to what was buried, to hold the parts that scared you and say, I see you now. This is the heart of Jung's individuation. Not becoming perfect, but becoming complete. And this is why detachment is feared. Because when you stop being emotionally available to others, you must become emotionally available to yourself. And you may not like what's there, but you cannot escape through others what you refuse to face within. They will call you cold. They will say you are distant, aloof, detached. But coldness is not absence of feeling. It is the absence of performance. It is the stillness that comes when you stop trying to be seen a certain way. When you no longer serve your vulnerability as currency, it is the quiet dignity of no longer bleeding just to be loved. Nietzsche warned us of the abyss, he said. If you gaze long enough into the abyss will gaze back into you. But what if that was the point? What if the abyss was not there to devour you, but to show you what you are? The abyss is not death, it is depth, a place so still, silent that your illusions cannot breathe inside it. This confrontation is not for the faint-hearted, because here there is no applause, no validation, no comforting narrative. Only you, and the versions of yourself you exiled to survive. But as they return, something ancient awakens, something buried under years of compliance, connection, performance, self-respect, the realization that you do not owe your soul to anyone's comfort, that your silence is not rude, it is sacred, your solitude is not empty, it is a place where your real name is remembered. This is not escape, this is emergence. You stop apologizing for the quiet. You stop fearing the distance. You stop softening your edges just to fit into spaces not meant for you. You walk through the temple, through the corridor, out into the misted valley. The shadows follow, not haunting, but whole. They are part of you now. Detachment was never about turning away. It was about turning inward. You withdrew, not to disappear, but to return with everything you once left behind. And now you are no longer afraid of the silence. Because in that silence, you finally heard yourself. Detachment is devotion. Detachment is often misunderstood. We call it coldness, indifference, a wounded soul retreating from the world. But true detachment is not withdrawal. It is devotion. It's not to apathy, but to something deeper, a path through the woods that only the soul can walk. This is the sacred solitude of Schopenhauer, not loneliness, but liberation. It is the space where silence stops being empty and becomes full of something ancient. Here you are no longer performing, no longer reaching to be understood, no longer trying to be enough for a world that never pauses long enough to see you. You are simply here. And in being here, you begin to remember. In every myth worth remembering, the hero leaves the village, not because they hate it, but because it cannot teach them what they now need to know. They step into the forest, into the desert, into the cave or the storm or the mountain. They leave not to escape, but to return, wiser. Nietzsche called it the journey toward the Bermensch, the overcoming of the self we were taught to be, so that something stronger, truer, might emerge. But the transformation does not happen in the crowd. It happens in the silence no one sees. When you stop answering every call for your energy, when you stop bending just to belong, when you stop sacrificing your becoming at the altar of other people's comfort, this is not selfishness. This is sacred refusal. Kierkegaard spoke of paradox. How to move forward, we must often retreat. To connect deeply, we must first disconnect honestly. This is the paradox of detachment. You do not pull away because you don't care. You pull away because you finally do. Alan Watts reminded us that the self is an illusion, a construct, a costume woven from fear, memory, and name. And sometimes you must disappear into the trees to remember what cannot be named. Not the ego, not the identity, but the silence that was there before you became someone. This is not exile. It is pilgrimage. Detachment is not escape. It is initiation. It is choosing to meet yourself before you offer yourself to anyone else. Because how can you be present if you've never met your own presence? How can you give if you do not know where your edges are? The emotionally unavailable are not always broken. Sometimes they are in chrysalis. In a world obsessed with constant access, constant answers, constant affirmation, there is something radical about choosing stillness, about protecting your energy like it is sacred, because it is, when you emerge, because you will. You are different, not louder, not softer, but clearer. You're no longer seeking permission to exist. You are no longer apologizing for the distance you needed to heal. Your presence is no longer offered freely to anyone who demands it. It is chosen, it is gifted. The hermit becomes the healer. Not because they avoided the world, but because they faced themselves. In solitude, they met their shadow and did not flinch. In silence, they touched the eternal and did not speak of it. Now when they return, they bring more than words. They bring wisdom. This is detachment, not as distance, but as devotion. To the self that was buried beneath obligation. To the soul that could not be heard over applause. To the truth that no crowd could give you. And now that you've heard it, you no longer need to prove it. Burn what you cannot carry. You cannot detach without loss. But not all loss is tragedy. Some loss is transformation. There comes a time when the soul grows too heavy with things it was never meant to carry. Masks pass down like heirlooms. Roles you played so long, they started playing you. But now something inside has changed. And what once felt like belonging begins to feel like burden. This is where many turn back. Because destruction has always frightened us. But there is a sacred kind of burning, one that does not annihilate, but clarifies. Carl Jung called it the persona, the mask we wear to meet the world, a necessary illusion. But when the mask becomes permanent, you forget there was ever a face beneath it. Detachment begins here, not with bitterness, but with honesty. You begin to see what was yours and what you simply inherited. And in that seeing, you start to release. As you step back from emotional obligations, things begin to fall away, not violently, but like leaves from a tree that no longer needs to hold them. Relationships built on need, conversations built on guilt, identities built on validation. Gone. Each flame a small funeral. Each ember a small freedom. Schopenhauer once wrote that to suffer is to exist, and to exist consciously is to suffer willingly. But through suffering, we see what cannot be unseen. That peace was never another's. That your worth was never supposed to be earned. That being everything for everyone was the surest way to be nothing for yourself. This is not the death of the self. It is the death of what was false. It's the end of needing to be understood by people who never saw you. It's the end of trying to earn rest through endless emotional labor. You stop chasing peace through people. You stop offering yourself to be fixed or fed upon. You stop mistaking survival for love. Kierkegaard called it despair, the sickness of a self that cannot become itself. And yet, in despair's deepest hollow, a strange possibility appears. That by letting go, you are not losing yourself, but finally beginning to meet yourself. Nietzsche gave us the idea of the eternal return, to live each moment as if you would live it over and over and over again. Would you live it again? Bound by the same guilt, tied to the same roles? Giving yourself to those who only take, or would you choose differently? Would you burn what you cannot carry? Alan Watts said that the self is an illusion, a ripple pretending to be the whole ocean. And when you finally stop clinging, when you let the fire consume everything you clung to, what remains is not emptiness, but presence, not performance, but will. You become the fire, not the fuel. And though the pain of detachment is real, so is the power that follows it. No longer tethered to ghosts, no longer shrinking to stay acceptable, no longer bending to keep the peace, Now you stand, not cold, but clean. Not hardened, but whole. Because sometimes, to truly begin, you must first let something end. So burn what you cannot carry, not to forget, but to become. Power in quiet presence, you enter a room and say nothing. But still everything shifts. Not because of dominance, not because of charm, but because of something far rarer. Presence. The world expects noise, explanations, proof. But those who have gone inward, those who have wandered through solitude, through silence, through the smoke and rubble of who they used to be, they no longer need to convince anyone. They simply are. Carl Jung once said, "Your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart." Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakens. This is that awakening. You no longer cast your longing outward. No longer beg the world to mirror back your worth. You've withdrawn your projections. You no longer chase the divine in others, because you've found it within. The unseen temple is the inner sanctuary, built not with noise, but with absence, not with others' affirmations, but with your own returning. This is the place where you no longer need to explain, to prove, to impress, because you've seen what you are beneath the masks. Once, your life was theater, roles assigned by culture, by trauma, by fear. But now you've chosen a different path, the terrifying path of inwardness, as Kierkegaard called it, where despair is not an enemy, but a companion, a teacher that asks, what part of you have you betrayed to be accepted? And in answering, you begin to return to yourself. This is not superiority. It is not aloofness. It is not the cold mask of detachment. It is serenity. You have faced your shadow, the rage, the fear, the wounded child, and held it in your arms instead of burying it beneath smiles. This quiet power does not seek control. It does not seek followers. It does not seek revenge. It simply exists. And in that existence, it unsettles the world, because it cannot be controlled. Friedrich Nietzsche warned us of the herd instinct, the compulsion to dissolve the self in collective noise. But when you leave the herd, you enter a strange exile, a quiet wilderness where you become something else. Not a rebel, not an outcast, but a sovereign. To be emotionally unavailable is not to reject the world, but to walk through it untouched by its compulsions. To feel love without losing your center. To offer your presence without leaking your soul. To give without bleeding. Schopenhauer once said, "A man can be himself only so long as he is alone." And in that sacred aloneness, you remember, you are not here to be understood. You are here to understand. You are not here to please. You are here to perceive. You are not here to echo others. You are here to resonate with what is true. When the world screams for your attention, your stillness becomes rebellion. When the world rewards performance, your authenticity becomes subversion. And when the world seeks to possess you, your quiet presence becomes power, not because it dominates, but because it does not need to. Alan Watts said, "Muddy water is best cleared by leaving it alone." You have left it alone. You no longer stir the waters. You simply sit by the river and let the clarity rise. You have become what the noise fears, what the chaos envies, what the false cannot imitate, a quiet presence, rooted, whole, free. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can be is unavailable to everything that seeks to steal your soul. Love without losing yourself, and then you return, but not as you were. You are no longer the open window, blowing in every storm, begging to be filled with light. No, now, you're the mountain beyond the window, unmoved by passing winds, watching silently as seasons change and people come and go. You once believed love was sacrifice, that being needed meant being whole, that being chosen meant being worthy. You bled for others, thinking that was connection. You bent yourself into shapes that fit their hunger, but you were not loving, you were leaking. Then came the void, not a heartbreak, not a betrayal, but a deeper fracture, where even your own voice no longer reached you. They have met their own chaos and no longer outsource salvation. So when you love now, it is not hunger, it is overflow. You are no longer seeking someone to fill the cracks. You have planted roots in the cracks themselves. You're no longer an empty cup begging to be poured into. You are the river that flows because it cannot do otherwise. In this world of constant availability, you are misunderstood. They call you distant, guarded, detached. But in truth, you are clear, you are no longer vibrating with need, no longer grasping for mirrors, no longer asking to be understood, because you have made peace with being a mystery even to yourself. Nietzsche spoke of the herd, the comfortable sameness of collective noise. To step away is not arrogance, it is courage. And here lies the paradox. When you stop being available to everyone, the right ones find you. When you stop performing to be seen, you begin to shine. When you stop needing to be understood, the truth begins to whisper in your silence. You gain power not by grabbing more, but by needing less. This is not detachment, this is arrival. To love without losing yourself is the rarest alchemy. To give without vanishing. To feel deeply without drowning. To care without clinging. Schopenhauer taught us that solitude is not suffering but sovereignty. That silence is not emptiness, it is essence. You are no longer afraid of being alone, because you've met yourself in your rawest form and found you were never missing. Alan Watts spoke of illusion, of the ego chasing itself in circles. But in stillness, you've stopped chasing. And that is why you now love from center, not from scarcity. You can walk away without bitterness. You can stay without fear, because your love is no longer a transaction. It is a state of being. This is what it means to love without losing yourself, to be the mountain instead of the window, to offer your heart without selling your soul, to be seen but not consumed. And in this sacred detachment, you have not disappeared. You've finally arrived.